is really frustrating. Great. Okay, let's see. Uh, do, 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 do. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Great, perfect. Okay. Well, we shall start. So welcome all to the Climate Leader Community uh, Public Forum and Public Hearing. Today is March 17th, 2025. And I think everybody on this call knows this, but I will just say it for the record, since maybe people will be listening after the fact. We've got our 4 appointed Energy and Climate Action Committee members. So this is an alphabetical order. Myself, Michael DeChiara, Gail Fleischiger, Isaac Goldstein, and Nate Hurd. We might be joined later by Bert Schwartz, who has been appointed but is not officially a member yet. And then our special guests from the Department of Energy Resources, DOER, are Chris Mason, who's the regional coordinator for Green Communities, and Michael Rossi, who's the Energy Code Specialist. So thank you both for joining us tonight and bringing your expertise. So the agenda is we are going to do a short introduction about the Climate Leaders Program. We're then going to have a presentation by Chris and Michael about the specialized opt-in building code for new construction. We're going to take a break at 6:45 and have a public hearing about the bylaw to support the opt-in code. And then once the public hearing is closed, we'll proceed on to the decarbonization by 2050 resolution and adopting a zero emission vehicle first policy for municipal vehicles. And then we will have questions and answers. Sound good to everybody? Okay, so what is the Climate Leader Community Program? So it's a state program, and Chris, if I get anything wrong, please jump in and correct me.
Sure.
So the Climate Leader Community Program is a state program that builds on the green community. Shutesbury is currently a green community and has been for a while. The CLC provides resources to municipalities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through electrification and maximizing the efficiency of buildings and transportation. So the goal is to really further the goals of the Commonwealth through municipal partnership. And towns that participate in the CLC program, which today is about doing the prerequisites to do that, are eligible to get grant funding up to $1 million. I don't expect Shutesbury will be getting that amount, but hopefully we'll get some funding towards the cost of activities that would implement greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And some examples of those would be on-site solar photovoltaics, solar thermal, heat pumps, energy storage, technical studies, which is something we've been wanting to do for a while, and other decarbonization activities. So it basically puts us in line for a new line of state funding, as well as gets us committed to dealing with climate mitigation activities. So the question is, why would Shutesbury or any other community want to be a climate leader community? And I think, as you can see on the screen, there's really 2 reasons. One is to access grants and funding to advance our clean energy goals. And the other is to advance the town's ability for resiliency, decarbonization, and clean energy adoption. So the substance of moving us forward and contributing to the larger solution and having the funds to be able to do that. What's required? That's what brings us here today. So there's a total of 6 things that need to happen to be a climate leader community. The first is be a green community in good standing, which Shutesbury is, and have an energy committee that advises the town on clean energy and climate issues, and that's ECAC. So we've achieved those 2 things that are currently in place. The reasons we're here today are the next 3 will come up hopefully at town meeting in 2025, the spring. The first one we're going to talk about is adopting a specialized opt-in building code for new construction. And that requires the bylaw, which is why we're having a subsequent hearing. Adopting a zero emission vehicle first policy for municipal vehicles, and then adopting a decarbonization by 2015 resolution. And we'll go into the context of what all of those are. And then assuming the town meeting passes all those three, we'll then be in a position to apply for funding to help us with the municipal decarbonization roadmap. We applied once. I can't remember if it was late 2024 or early 2025, but a few months ago, and it's getting to be a competitive process, so we did not get approved. And I think by having the other three elements in place, we'll be better positioned to do that. So this is the list of what is required to get our status into climate leader community program. So the first one is probably the most complex, which is why we invited Chris and Michael to join us. It's a specialized opt-in building code, and I think I just have a few slides before I turn it over to them. So currently we have a bylaw in place that basically, because we're a green community, it requires us, as the stretch codes changed over time and they get adopted by the state over time, they change, we automatically go along for that ride. And so the most recent version took place on July 1st, 2024. So we are currently working on and requiring residents to have stretch codes in place. And what we're looking to do with the new bylaw is to build on the stretch code with additional provisions, which would directly advance the climate goals. And the new provisions, as Chris will describe and Michael will describe, apply only to new construction of residential and commercial buildings. So we're basically already doing a stretch code as opposed to the basic code, and we're looking to take it one step further. And I think, Chris, it's all on to you, and you just have to ask Gail for permission to share. And I will stop my sharing.
Gail, can I have permission to share?
You may. So granted.
Okay, let's see.
Perfect timing. Bert, who is our newest appointed member, but not yet sworn in, I don't think, just joined us. So this will be educational for him as well.
Okay, can everybody see my slide?
Yeah.
The front cover slide. Okay. So today I'm going to real quickly go over the policy background to the specialized stretch energy code. I'm going to touch on the climate leader communities program just a little bit because where Michael went over requirements, he just barely touched on the carrot, and I'm going to go over the carrot a little bit more, and then go dive into the specialized stretch code. So policy background. Back in 2008, when the Global Warming Solutions Act was passed in Massachusetts that formed the Green Communities Program, I'm going to say kind of in a nutshell, the utilities, the Green Communities Program, the state, the idea of energy efficiency was around replacing, avoiding the cost of building a new power plant. So it was cost-effective energy efficiency, was the large part of it. Since that time, the focus has really shifted. It's shifted in the state, it's shifted with the utilities, it's now shifting with the Green Communities Program, starting in 2021 with the Climate Act, which committed Massachusetts to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, and authorized the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs to set interim goals. The goal really has shifted from away from energy efficiency to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Energy efficiency is definitely a part of that, but it's not the same thing. So you're really aiming towards greenhouse gas reduction now. That's what the Climate Leader Communities Program is kind of tied to. The strategy that the states had for this, you could say, is just electrify everything at first. So electrify your heating, electrify your cooling, electrify your transportation. And then since everybody's using the common source of electricity, then clean it up, clean up the grid, clean up the electric supply, so that between now and 2050, we've significantly dropped 85% dropped our greenhouse gas emissions from electricity. That last little 15% would be captured through carbon sequestration. So that's the overarching strategy for the state to get there. I'm going to give you a see slide. There we go. Using one as using the home heating as an example. The 3 columns on the left-hand side are fossil fuels. The 3 columns on the right-hand side are using electric resistance heat, which is very, very energy intensive. And then there's cold climate heat pumps and ground source heat pumps. The numbers on the bottom show the pounds of emissions that would be created today if you were to provide 1 million BTU of heat into a house. So all getting the same amount of heat going in, how much carbon emissions would you put out? So today, if you have an air source heat pump, you're going to be producing 45% less carbon emissions than the most efficient fossil fuel system we have out there. And if you did that, you could then ride on the coattails of the state reducing greenhouse gas emissions from our electric grid. So now I just jumped to 2050. You can see the numbers here up at the top left-hand corner, 2020 to 2050. And without doing anything else, you're now 85% less than the cleanest burning fossil fuel, because the grid's gotten cleaner and you're using that electricity to move heat into your house or move heat out of your house in the summer. And your energy use is way down for ground source heat pump, your carbon emissions. So this is just one example of, of using electrifying something, in this case, heating and cooling buildings, cleaning up the power grid, and then watching your overall carbon emissions going down. So climate leader communities, here are again the requirements for certification that Michael explained really in nice detail. I won't go into them here anymore. And the climate leaders, what do we offer? So we do offer a technical assistance grants of up to $150,000. We could kind of picture communities going for one of these grants first, because this is where you can prepare for, really large projects with detailed engineering, so that you are really ready to go out to bid. You're ready to go, solve and implement a large project of some kind. Could be any of the following on the, anything below, additional ones. It could be these in combination: on-site solar PV, heat pumps, energy storage. We're looking at funding big projects to help communities get over those hurdles they face with some of their buildings. The opt-in specialized code for small residential. As Michael mentioned, there is the base code, which everybody in the state adheres to some extent, and then the stretch code is attached on top of it. And that's where most of the communities in Massachusetts are right now. And this is where Shutesbury is right now, is the stretch code. Right now, there are 50 communities left on the base code. We have 253 municipalities who are now working under the stretch code. And we have 48 municipalities who have adopted this little add-on piece. It's actually a very small little add-on piece to the stretch code called the specialized code. This is a map showing who's adopted it so far. The light colored ones, the whitish ones, are the communities that are still on the base code. The light blue communities are the communities that have adopted the stretch code. And the dark blue communities are communities that have adopted the specialized code. So in Western Mass, you can see Amherst, Pelham, Northampton, East Hampton, and Ashfield so far. To understand the specialized code and the stretch code, and actually even the base code, you should understand a little bit of what a HERS process is, Home Energy Rating System. And it's a way where you would contract with a HERS rater when you build a house, who helps you make sure that your house design can actually reach the energy efficiency levels you're looking for at the beginning. And then as the house is built, they would come in and test the house, testing ducts, testing insulation, before it gets hidden up, before sheetrock goes up and you can't correct something, you have an opportunity to correct it And then at the end, to test the house at the end so that you know when you're done that you've got a house that has met the goals that you set forth in the beginning. The lower the
Chris?
HERS rating, the
Chris, sorry
tighter the house. Yes.
sorry to interrupt. Would 1413-284-9050 please identify yourself? Would 193-784-9050 please identify yourself?
Joe Salvador.
Thank you. And would Kathleen, would you please identify yourself?
She's not on. This is just Joey on.
Excuse me?
This is just Joe Salvador.
Kathleen?
No, Joe Salvador.
You know, there's a different identification with this Kathleen. We're just trying to get the last name.
Oh, Salvador. Salvador.
Oh, so Joe, you're
Can you
calling in on the phone and computer.
No, I'm just on my phone. I don't know about any computer because I couldn't. I'm away from the house. That's all. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, why don't we
Are
assume?
you guys talking about? Are you guys talking about the stretch code today?
Yes, we're in the middle of it.
Oh, because I wanted to have just something to say.
Yep,
No.
we'll get there.
So I called in. Okay, that's all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, why don't we assume we'll just wait and see after Chris's presentation. We'll check in with Kathleen. It sounds like
Okay.
it's either Joe or not. But
Okay.
sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
Okay, so as I was saying, the HERS process, the lower the HERS rating, the tighter the house is, the less energy it needs to operate. And if you can see this slide here, you can see that over the, so, you know, every 3 years or so, the base code changes, the stretch code changes, and that's been happening for, you know, a number of years. And, you know, as the stretch code gets tighter and tighter and wants a lower and lower HERS rating, the base code's been following along right afterwards. When the specialized code came in, it was a lower rating than the stretch code, but the stretch code is caught up to the specialized code as well. With the base code, you know, is still a bit higher. So just knowing what the HERS number is, the lower the number, the tighter it is. So the specialized versus the stretch code. Right now, you guys are under the stretch code. And what we're talking about tonight is the specialized code. So this is how adopting the specialized code will affect your building code. If you're building an all-electric new home, so there's no combustion of any fossil fuels or anything else in the house, then the specialized code won't affect you. It's, you know, it's basically a pass-through. You're just going to build to the same code that you have right now is going to be what you build to if you pass a specialized code for all electric homes. If you have a house that has some kind of combustion, whether it's a gas stove, gas dryer, could be a wood stove, then you are put into what they call the mixed fuel new homes. And they have to meet a slightly tighter HERS rating. You see that goes from HERS 45 down to HERS 42. And then depending on the size of the building, you need to wire for electrification in cases where that makes sense. In other words, if you put in a gas stove, gas cooktop, you have to, before you close the walls in, when you're running the electrical lines, you have to run an electric line to that, where that gas stovetop is. That could then be used to replace that stovetop with electric stovetop at some point in the future. What you're doing is you're being asked to, or you're being required to put in the wiring before it gets really expensive to do so. So you're doing it when it's cost effective at the moment now. And then if you have the capability of getting the solar, you're required to put in a certain amount of solar PV. So under 4,000 square feet, you're required to put in a minimum of 4 kilowatts, if you can. I'll go into details in a minute. If you're over 4,000 square feet, you have to put in wiring for electrification, and then solar PV enough to bring the building down to what we call net zero, so that you're producing as much electricity over the course, you're producing as much from your solar array over the course of the year as you're using. I have on here, it almost seems like it shouldn't be here because is not affected by the specialized code, but just for clarity, home additions and alterations, they're covered under the stretch code. They're covered under your current code. So adopting the specialized code won't change them at all. The specialized code is for new construction and not home additions or alterations. Something similar can be said for historic or existing homes. All right, kind of goes a little bit more into the solar PV. So if you're mixed fuel, then solar is required for mixed fuel buildings when there is suitable solar roof zone of greater than 300 square feet. So you need to have, enough roof space aimed in the right direction in order to put an array in. If you don't have that, you won't have to put an array in. If you have a large, beautiful maple tree on the south side of your building and you don't want to get rid of it, you don't have to. If you're building deep in the woods, you don't have to. If you're building a house that doesn't have the right orientation of any of the roof lines, then you don't have to put in the solar. For all electric homes, no PV is required. The stretch code requires that you have a solar ready roof, but that's under the stretch code, it remains the same. The all electric buildings are really nicely subsidized at this point, both state and federal. The federal subsidies are through tax credits. I mention this in particular because it's not a grant. It's not money coming to you that way. It's built into the tax code, which is a little bit harder to play with. So there's some hope that it will remain for quite a while. But there's also state funds for all electric homes, single family or small family, 2 to 4 units. Solar incentives also include the state's SMART program and the fact that you have no sales tax, no extra property tax on the added value to your home. Okay, so a few cost comparisons. If you have a large single family electric, this is as you would expect. It's an all electric. So if you went from the stretch code to a specialized code, your costs aren't going to change at all. And if anybody wants these slides, you can see the details that go into this calculation with all the footnotes and stuff. On the other hand, if you have a large single family gas home, then your pre-wiring costs might kick in there. I will add right now, the reason you're mixed fuel is because you have a wood stove. There won't be any pre-wiring costs for a wood stove because there really is no electric replacement for a wood stove. But if you had like a gas dryer and you had to do some pre-wiring to make it, that would add some cost. And putting the solar in would add some cost. And yet the solar would have a payback to it. So you would pay off your investment over time. And I can go into small single family electric and small single family gas, very similar. I think that is all I have. So,
Cool.
what time is it?
Thank you, Chris. It is 6:35. So I think what I'd like to do is maybe just open it up for questions. So not opinions yet. I think what I'd like to do is have the opinions happen in the hearing, which is in 10 minutes. But if there's clarifying questions for Chris or for Michael about the slides, maybe we can try to address them for 10 minutes and then we'll start the hearing at 6:45. And I will say after this, we'll arrange to get these slides from Chris and then put them on the ECAC webpage. Nate, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a question about HERS rating and indoor air quality. So, you're talking about the relationship between the HERS rating, which is like the tightness of the envelope, of your home, which is part of what keeps your warmth in there or your conditioned temperature at a stable rate efficiently. But if someone were to build a home that includes uh, a combustion within the home, that triggers a lower HERS rating requirement. And I'm just sort of curious about air exchange and the maintenance of indoor air quality under like these different HERS regimens. So I'm just imagining uh, if I'm burning something in the house, that would degrade the air quality if there were no air exchange with the outdoors. So I was wondering if you or Mike could kind of comment about how building to code accounts for indoor air quality. Because I have heard concerns about like, oh, well, maybe an envelope could be too tight uh,
Yeah,
in,
Nate.
in some regards.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm happy to answer that. So, I want to just reiterate that this question is more related to the stretch code than it is for the specialized code. So, but the stretch code does have provisions in there for energy recovery ventilators or heat recovery ventilators to supply the whole house mechanical ventilation system. And essentially, what those systems do is bring in fresh air from the outdoors, put them through a heat exchanger, and bring it into the house while simultaneously exhausting stale air from the home back to the outside. So constantly fresh air is being brought in. So some of those indoor air quality concerns are actually addressed by the system being put. There's a really big myth in building science that you can build houses too tight. What the actual thing that I like to say here is the phrase build tight, ventilate right, right? So when you're thinking about the building as a system, you're looking not just at the insulation as one component and the ventilation system as another, but thinking of them as integrated. So you want to make sure that when you're building the houses tight, you have a proper ventilation strategy that can accommodate that. And with the ERV or HRV used as part of the stretch code, that can accommodate the ventilation pretty well. So energy codes typically do have a really significant positive impact on indoor air quality, I'd say.
Thanks. That's super helpful. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Michael. Does anyone else have a question, a clarifying question they want to ask of Chris and Michael before we hop in? Melissa, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Question along with what Nate had said. So Shutesbury is known for its radon quirk that we have here. So how with the tightness again, have you compensated for a radon issue in someone's house related to the envelope being really tight?
So it's my understanding that radon's addressed in another part of the building code that's not the energy code. I believe there are probably provisions addressing radon in the International Residential Code or another suite of codes that are available out there. So I know the energy codes do, or no, the energy code in particular, I don't believe addresses radon, but the other codes that you have to meet as part of the building code, that's where you can find those specific requirements there.
Okay, thank you.
Michael, just to sort of follow up on that, I think, Melissa, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think the issue would be if you have a really tight envelope, does that affect the buildup or exposure of radon?
Yeah, so the tighter the house is, the more radon it holds, as it radiates up from the earth. So it has nowhere to go. So it increases the radon parts per million in your home. EPA does say it has to be under 2 to be safe at a safe level. But parts of Shutesbury, it is over 20 and above, and some people have had to put in mitigating systems. And so as a house gets tighter, a leaky house is a healthier house if you have a radon issue. So it just is it is something of concern depending on where you live in Shutesbury, that tightening a house or building a house with a really tight envelope actually could potentially create another issue for a homeowner,
So, Michael, do you mind if I step in here?
No, I'd love it.
So, building the tight house I know we often think of our existing houses because you have, maybe you have a dirt floor in your basement. Maybe you have a cracked, you have a concrete with some cracks in it and stuff. Correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but when you're building to the stretch code, and again, this isn't the specialized code we're talking about the stretch code. You're going to be air sealing and weatherizing the entire envelope. It's going to be going around the basement as well. So you're going to be building on insulation and in an air sealed. So you're going to largely trap the radon out of the house as much as you're going to trap anything in the house. And then you do have the ventilation system on top of that.
What I've learned from radon in the issue that I've researched is that it comes through concrete and most materials. That there's nothing that seals it out except for removing it from a fan from underneath the basement.
I think, Melissa, in terms of the context of this bylaw,
Yeah.
since it's focused on new construction, it seems like it would fall to, I don't know if the building inspector would regulate or pre-inspect, the mitigation for radon.
Yeah.
But it seems like because we're not, as Chris was saying, we're not focused on existing houses. So
No, that yeah, I was just, depending on where you build a house will be if there's a
Yeah.
potential.
Yeah,
benefit.
I can speak to this a little bit more too. So, looking at the Massachusetts Building Code,
Yeah.
it looks like, again, this is outside the scope of the energy code, but it's something that is addressed in the building code in Appendix AF, which has information relating to radon control methods for new construction.
Okay.
So Appendix AF of the 10th edition of the Massachusetts Building Code
Yeah.
is where you can find additional guidance on that.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. And I wonder, it seems like if there was high radon in new construction, Chris, if it was because again, we're talking about the stretch code. If a building needed to have different kind of ventilation, just say they couldn't close off the envelope at the basement level, it'd be up to the building inspector to figure out if there was an exception or something to sort of make sure that it was public safety ready as opposed to energy ready. Like that it wouldn't be precluded by this bylaw. It would just be up to the building inspector to make sure that the home was safe.
Well, I think Michael Rossi has got the right response. It is addressed elsewhere in the building code.
Okay.
And the other thing I will say is that, as Michael pointed out too, it's a question that refers, well, it doesn't really even refer to the stretch code, but it's not something that'll be affected by a vote on the specialized code, because the specialized code won't change how you build to the house, one way or the other.
Can I jump in here for a second? This
Sure.
is Rita. I don't, on my phone, I can't figure out the raised hand feature. I know that the habitat houses are built with, all the new habitat houses are built to deal with radon. And Michael Broad, my husband, is here to tell you what is done.
Hi. Yeah, we build net zero houses, and they're all, we get HERS ratings down in the single digits. But all of our houses, and it's a very simple thing, you put piping under the slab in the bottom and you run a pipe through the roof. That's a passive radon system, and then that takes care of almost all situations. If you end up running into a high radon area, then you put a fan somewhere that boosts the ventilation. It takes care of it. We've had places where we had extremely high radon, and you can only test once you build a house. So, but the same things hold. There are ways of dealing with all of these things that, as you guys mentioned, the HRVs, ERVs. It's all a question of controlling it. And I would say that beyond that, the concern with too tight a house is if you don't, once you get to a certain point, and we've long passed that in our basic building codes, then if you don't build a tight house, you're going to start having moisture problems all over the place.
Thank you, Michael. And we're just about 6:45. I just want to make an editorial comment that when I was in elementary school, there were always 4 Michaels in my class, all the way through 1 to 5. So we got room for one more at this meeting if someone wants to show up.
And that was
So-
Michael Broad.
So it's 6:45, and so I'm gonna move us into the public hearing. And so just for everyone's knowledge, we'll have the public hearing. It'll be the opportunity for people to share their thoughts about the stretch code. And then when we close,
Specialized code.
the specialized code, sorry. And then when we close the hearing, we'll go into the other two elements that Shutesbury has to sort of meet in order to become a climate leader community. So I will call the hearing order at 6:45. I got a little bit procedural stuff to do, so bear with me. I'm going to read what the posting was, and then I'm going to read what the current proposed bylaw is, and then we'll go from there. So, in accordance with Mass General Law, the Shutesbury Energy and Climate Action Committee will hold a public hearing on Monday, March 17th, 2025, today, to consider proposed town general bylaw for the specialized energy code. The bylaw is a requirement for the town to be included in the Mass Climate Leader Community Program, which seeks to encourage municipal policies that decarbonize Massachusetts communities. The specialized stretch code outlines decarbonization related building requirements for new construction. This meeting will be held virtually, which it is. And I think that's all we need to do. And then the article, as ECAC is currently drafted, it says to see if the town will repeal the town of Shutesbury general bylaw entitled Stretch Energy Code. That's the one that's currently in place, and replace it with a new general bylaw entitled Specialized Energy Code for the purpose of regulating the design and construction of buildings for the effective use of energy and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions pursuant to the entirety of 225 CMR 22 and 23, including appendices RC and CC, including future additions, amendments, or modifications thereto, with an effective date of May 31st. That's assuming that will be our town meeting date, a copy of which is on file with the town clerk or act relative thereto. So assuming that there's no changes, that would be the bylaw that we're considering and that, people can respond to. And then just going forward, I think the next things, what I want to do is next accept any, public comments. It's not really a time for discussion. Once we close the hearing, if we have back and forth beyond that, we can. I know if there's clarifying things about people's comments, we can definitely do that. ECAC will accept written documentation up until April 1st, 2025. So just a little over 2 weeks from now. And then finally, just to clarify, ECAC's jurisdiction is to make recommendations to town meeting. Town meeting vote will be the final decision on this. So having read that, Joe, since you said you wanted to comment, do you want to chime in first on what your thoughts are about the specialized stretch energy code? Joe Salvador, are you still with us?
He's on mute.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hello? I don't know if you
Yeah.
can hear me or not.
we can hear you.
So here's my question. Hi, everybody, and thank you for working on this. But the only couple questions I have, because I've done a few houses in town, and dealing with the energy code, which is the last house I did, and only problems I found with being in Shutesbury and only dealing with having a house that's all electric, you lose power unless you have solar. You got to have an alternative form of heat. And that was the one thing that didn't come in. And the minute you put an alternative form of heat in, you don't follow the same guidelines, and the amount of money they give you back is minimal because it drops it a lot. And that was one of the things I got. And to make the code as it is now, the cost of the insulation and the fans running 24/7 gets very expensive. And that's just a house that doesn't even have, like some neighbors who did the same thing, have a fireplace. When they run their fireplace, because the house is so tight, they have to open a window to get enough airflow in the house in order to burn their fireplace. So there's a point of having so tight that, like I've heard before, having a house that's just the air quality in the house, even with the fans running on every floor, and those things run all the time. So my take is that it's just kind of hard with the energy to make the energy code with the cost of insulation and everything going up so high. That's it.
Thanks, okay, thank you, Joe. So I think, Chris, maybe, it would be helpful not to respond to good or bad, but maybe just if, to clarify, I think for Joe, but also for the recording, like, are there things in there that you would want to clarify based on what Joe said, and also to clarify between stretch code and specialized? Because if there's things that are already in place because of the stretch code and adopting a specialized code would not make a difference, we should clarify that now. So is there anything you want to share in that regard?
It's hard to say what is sharing, what's responding. But it is definitely a comment more to do with the code that you currently have. Because the specialized code, what the specialized code would require might be something that someone might even choose, is if you're worried about a high electric bill, then putting solar on, which has got a payback, will actually pay itself back and earn you money over the time, is one way of offsetting some of the costs. The other comment I was going to say, just slipped my mind. Must not have been that important.
Chris, I can chime in too. So another thing
Yes, please do.
that a backup generator is still allowed when following the all-electric path. So even if the building is considered all electric, if you have a backup generator around the house when the power goes out, that's still allowed, and it's not going to prohibit you from building all electric. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael.
And then I guess the one last thing I was going to mention is the house built to the stretch code. When power goes out, it's going to maintain its heat for quite a while. It's not going to be the same as living in a house that was built in the 1960s, even early 2000s or whatever. So the house is going to maintain its own heat for a long time.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone else have any comments they want to share in context of a public hearing about adopting the specialized stretch code? Okay. Going once. Mateo.
Yeah, I have a question, I guess. So I'm very happy to hear that we are considering something that is going to be taking us closer to carbon neutrality. I guess my question is about what the data says about how something like this impacts home affordability, because we have an affordability crisis. So is there any data from those other communities that have adopted this about what that does to housing prices?
Chris is scrolling through the slides.
Well, so this is a slide showing the cost difference between building to the current code that you have right now and the specialized code for an all-electric house. So adopting the specialized code for all-electric houses won't change the cost. So it's a non-issue for all-electric houses. It will change costs for a mixed fuel home. But if you're worried about affordability for the folks who are low on the income level, lower on the income level, low on the income level, you're not going to be buying a new house anyhow. You're going to be buying a used house. But for those who might be building to that income level or building for themselves from that income level, if they build all electric, that's both going to be the least expensive way of building the house, and it's and with the specialized code, it's not going to change it any.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone else have any comments they want to share in the context of a public hearing? Okay.
Joe's trying to speak.
Yeah. Joe, did you want to share something else?
No, I just must have the phone said me that.
Okay. Okay. We're hearing none others. I'll give it just another minute if people have any other comments they want to make in the public hearing. And just to say, again, the idea here is that this is to gather public information orally. We can accept it in writing for the next 2 weeks up until April 1st. And all that will do is inform whether ECAC puts forth a recommendation for town meeting consideration and what the scope of the articles are. Currently, I think what we read at the beginning is what we would put forth, but it'll still be town meeting vote when we get there. So it looks like there's no other comments. So I will. Hey, Rita. I don't know if, I'm trying to think. I
I'm
don't think
here.
we have. Do
Yeah.
we have? Do you know? Do we have? I don't think we have to vote to. I can just as chair close the hearing, right? I don't think we have to vote to close it.
It's funny. I just saw notes about public hearings. I think you can close it. Yes.
Okay. Well, I will close the public hearing at 6:56 and thank everyone for their comments. So now that the hearing is closed, anyone else have any other questions before we sort of shift gears to the other two elements of
Should I stop
I'm-
recording?
no, keep it going because people are going to want to hear the other
Okay.
elements as well. Thank you, Gail. So I think I will shift gears and I will share my screen if I can get back to where I was.
Chris needs to take his stop. There you go.
Yeah, I have to get mine up there again. Do. Okay. Um, okay, can you all see that? Requirement number 2?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we just went through the first requirement, which was the specialized stretch code. So the second requirement is approving a decarbonization by 2050 resolution. And this is what we're currently proposing as the resolution. Be it resolved that the members of Shutesbury Town Meeting call on town government to commit to, and this is important, with appropriate support from the state and federal governments to bring municipal net carbon emissions to zero as quickly as reasonably possible with a target date of 2050. And we can discuss it in a second, but there's a couple of whereas reasons I wanted to pull out. Basically, what we would see at town meeting is probably like 8 or 10 whereases and then the resolution I just read. So one of the whereases is that the idea is we want to drive the adoption of clean energy resources, bolster energy efficiency and resiliency, and mitigate adverse effects associated with fossil fuel dependency. So that's one of the things we want to do if we resolve to do this. The second would be that we have the potential to transition to 100% renewable energy sources while doing those other things. So it's within our power to do that if we vote to do that. And then, as we discussed earlier, by doing this, we create the opportunity to apply for state technical assistance in developing a decarbonization roadmap. So we can get the state to help us come up with a plan for how to get from here to there. So those are the three things. I guess one thing I would just call out, and that if people have questions, is it's come up, I ended up talking to, at Chris's recommendation, I think it was the chair of the Ashfield equivalent of ECAC, because they passed these resolutions, I think it was last year. The important thing here is, we can do that if we get resources from the feds or the state to help us move in that direction. So whether that's technical assistance with a roadmap, if we get clean energy status, so we can get state grants to do technical assistance or other big projects, those are things we can do. At town meeting, if someone says we don't have the money to do it, we probably don't have the resource to do it right now. It's sort of a partnership of this, the town anteing up money and looking for financial and policy assistance from the state and the feds. So I think it's while we're resolving to do it, we're also recognizing that we can't do it on our own. So I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments about that, just to clarify, especially since we have Chris here. So, anyone have any thoughts or questions about this one? Okay. So moving on then, the last one is the third requirement is adopt a zero emission vehicle first policy for municipal vehicles. And the question is, why would we want to do it? There's four reasons. One's someone having. Oh. Rita, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just, as I said, I had just had notes out about how to conduct a public hearing, and you are supposed to vote.
Oh,
There is
thank you.
supposed to be a vote. Yes,
Okay.
sorry,
That's
sorry.
all right. Well, we will do that now.
Okay.
Someone want to move to close the public hearing? Among ECAC?
I will move to close the public
Deal,
hearing.
so moved.
Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none. Isaac, how do you vote?
Aye.
Gail?
Aye.
Nate?
Aye.
And I am an aye. We're officially closing the public hearing. Rita, thank you so much. And I think is it exactly 7 o'clock? Is that when we just closed it? I don't have the time in front of me, but Gail, whatever time it is when the public hearing closed.
When you were reading that, Michael, I heard the church bell next door go off, so I think you got
Cool.
it.
It's exactly
Okay.
7. Yep. You're
Perfect.
good.
Thank you. Rita, thank you for the backup. It's all about teamwork. So moving on to the why we would do the zero emission first policy. One is to accelerate the adoption of emissions reduction technologies in terms of our vehicle fleet, to move to electric or other environmental advantageous vehicles. Two is to minimize the long-term environmental and financial impacts of fleet vehicles. Third is to optimize the composition of the fleet to achieve maximum fuel efficiency. So as we don't have a large fleet, but yet we have a fleet. So optimize the composition. And then the other one, which we will soon be talking to the select board about, is advancing the installation of electric charging infrastructure across municipal facilities. And as a public service announcement, I'll just say that the plan is currently on April 8th at the select board meeting. We will be talking with the select board and a vendor for energy charging infrastructure for Shutesbury to adopt or sign a contract about it, electric charging facilities in town. So anyone who wants to come to that meeting. So that's sort of the why. And then the how. This is language that all this language is pretty much taken from DOER guidance. It seems like we're just basically taking what the state is recommending, but this would be the hierarchy in terms of how vehicles which are fossil fuel based, we would replace them. So the first preference would be battery electric vehicle. Second would be a plug-in hybrid vehicle. Third would be hybrid electric or alternative fuel vehicle. And then the fourth would be a standard vehicle operated with the most fuel efficient internal combustion engines. So that would be, as we're looking to replace, if you can get one, you go to the one. If you can't do the other, you go to the second. The other two things in the how category is that this would be basically for vehicles that need to be replaced either because they're no longer operable, or in the case of Shutesbury, we tend to we'll take a police car and we'll give it to the fire department, for example. So it cannot be recycled from one municipal department to the other. So if we have a police cruiser that, we've decided we need to replace, but we're going to hand it off to the fire department, it wouldn't require us to replace it with electric first. We would be allowed to sort of hand it down to the fire department. Once the fire department can't do it, then we would be retiring it, looking to replace. And so, and I would imagine if we kept our usual cycle, down the road, we replace the police cruiser with electric and hand down the combustion engine to the fire, if that's the way it worked. The other thing to consider which is really important, is that when we're considering a vehicle replacement, that the function of the vehicle were reviewed for potential replacement. So it's what are we using the vehicle for? So, you know, there's some practical implications, which is the next slide. And these are two exceptions, which I think, you know, will get raised at town meeting, but wanted to mention them here. So the first one is that the policy doesn't apply to specialized equipment or off-road vehicles. And again, this is what's, you know, in state language so far. And then even more importantly, we wouldn't have to do it if it's determined that a zero emission vehicle does not meet the operational needs of, you know, what we're looking for. So if we can find something, or if we can find something, but it's not going to do the job, that we're, you know, the intent is to follow that sequence and to move things to electric. But, you know, I can imagine someone saying, well, we can't buy this plug-in electric because it, you know, it doesn't do what we need it to do. We need to document that. It'd have to be a legitimate argument. It's not just someone's opinion. It has to be data behind it. But that the town is not committing to do something that whereby we're spending tax money and getting something that doesn't do the job that we need to do for town residents. So those are the two, I think, caveats that are important. But, and, you know, besides that, we would follow this sequence. And that would be our commitment in terms of adopting this policy, that we would want to proceed in that regard. Gail.
What would an example be of not doing the job that's required? Is that call on a fire truck or a highway truck or?
Well, the first thing I think, you know, which is important is that for the large vehicles, let's see where it's, is it this one? No. It's this, the first exception. It does not apply to specialized equipment or off-road vehicles. So I don't think they're making fire pumpers, you know, trucks that are electric right now. Although I did see something a couple of weeks ago that it's starting to happen. I think there was a big bulldozer that I saw internationally built that's electric. Isaac?
I think one of the other points that we had discussed um is if the electric option were cost prohibitive, that would be kind of a detrimental to the town, which is important to mention as well.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. You know, and Gail, to answer your question, I don't think this is a real example anymore, but hypothetically, just say we needed the cruiser to go 0 to 60 in X, you know, and a plug-in electric wouldn't get there, although electric actually goes 0 to 60 faster than fuel-based cars. So it's not really a good example. But if there was some function, or, you know, if the battery was so big that there was no back seat, for example, and you needed to be able to put prisoners in the back seat, that would be a function that wouldn't, you know, I don't think it's here because it's important to know that we're not committing to things that won't fit the bill. But I think increasingly so, the alternatives that are non-fuel based, fossil fuel based, are viable for what the town would need. Isaac?
I think like a good example of clarification would be, you know, a police cruiser or a fire truck has a lot of electrical load outside of just the physical driving of it. You know, there are different components that require a lot of electricity, whereas the technology might be cost prohibitive at this point, or at least the battery life would be of a great concern in an emergency situation.
Chris?
So I think it could be something like that. It could be, and what we're facing right now, just looking at high efficiency vehicles, or someone trying to buy, towns, you know, police departments trying to buy electric vehicles. Michael, I think you were kind of on top of it. You know, you don't have enough cargo area. The clearance isn't high enough. I mean, it could be very simple things that, you know, oh, great, I have a battery electric vehicle here, but you know, it won't do the job on our back roads. Something like that. Also, I would point out in the guidance documents that we have, there's a really nice statement that I think if you don't mind, I'll read it right now.
Yeah, please.
It kind of, you're covering the same stuff, but I like the way this is written. This policy shall not require a department to take any action which conflicts with local, state, or federal requirements, nor mandate the procurement of products that do not perform adequately for their intended use, exclude adequate purchasing competition, or require the purchase of vehicles that are not commercially available or practicable. You can see where, you know, the policy is not meant to lock you in to, you know, buying the vehicle that's on the cutting edge that doesn't quite do what you're asking it to do.
That's
Yeah.
great. If you could send that, Chris, I mean, I can find it, but if you wouldn't mind sending it, that would be really helpful to
Sure.
bring forward to town meeting. So I think on this topic, do people have any other questions? I don't see any. Okay. So I think that, I just messed up my view here. Sorry about that. So there was one other, for the next steps. Zoom is sometimes challenging. So the next steps would be, we're gonna, as a committee, ECAC will consider the comments that were mentioned here tonight, anything we receive in writing, and we'll discuss the final versions of these 3 items to make sure, number one, that they comply with DOR requirements, if we needed to tweak them. But I think, adhering to what DOR is requiring is essential, if we're going to bother putting them forth. Then, assuming that they're in good order, we would vote to, we've already voted a few months ago to recommend them, but we will review them, and then we would vote and move them to the select board for review for conclusion on town meeting warrant. And then if town meeting approves it, at our town meeting, the last step would be ECAC and the town would apply to DOER for funding to develop a decarbonization roadmap, which is the final item needed. And Chris, maybe you can just speak a little bit about the timing, but the idea is we need to develop a roadmap to figure out how we get from where we are to where we want to go. And that requires technical assistance, which therefore requires a little bit of money to do. And then I think that would be the final requirement. But Chris, can you clarify for us just a little dance between that?
Clarifying, I'm not sure. So as far as, once you get selected, I think the construction of the roadmap can be fairly quick. Particularly if the Energy Committee is willing to put a little sweat equity in, and make sure that the people helping build this have got the right data. And then what the roadmap is, so it's not going to be like this shiny document you put up and say, here is our roadmap, here's how we're going to do it. It's going to identify your trigger events. A roof needs to be replaced. So that at that point, you should be considering X, Y, and Z. A boiler has got only so much life. And yet right now you wouldn't want to put a heat pump in this building because it's just too leaky. So, you need to be working on the weatherization type stuff. So it's going to be more of a broad plan that's based off your capital improvements as much as it is, what grants are available and stuff. And it's meant to be to live over time. So it'll change over time as you accomplish certain things, as technologies change. And keep in mind that it's a roadmap for a couple decades. It's not something you have to get done in 2 years. It'll be a roadmap that's going to change over time for you to get to by 2050. I don't know, does that help? I'm not sure what
I had one other follow-up thing, I guess, to clarify. So in terms of becoming a climate leader community, like, getting the check mark next to the town of Shutesbury, we don't get the check mark until we do the roadmap and we submit it. So that would be right now we've got 2 out of the 6. If town meeting approved the 3 that we've just been discussing, that would set us up for, hopefully being more competitive to apply for the roadmap. Although I know we could do the roadmap on our own, getting the technical assistance would be helpful. And then once we submit the roadmap to DOER, then that would be the final thing. And then we would then be a climate leader community. We could do a little happy dance to the town and then apply for money. Is that a good summary?
You've got it exactly right. Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. And then if you have all the other criteria met, and the only thing you need is left is a decarbonization roadmap, that's a pretty strong position for putting in for application for help.
Yeah, I think they were collectively assuming that would put us in a good spot. Thank you.
Yes, it would. Yeah.
Yeah. Matteo, you have a question or a comment? Where'd you go?
Just a question. And I think Chris just addressed it actually by referring to the roadmap as a kind of a living document that changes over time. But I guess I was going to ask to what extent it is binding. What happens if we create this roadmap and then, 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, we decide to set it aside or don't follow its recommendations?
You're absolutely right. It's not binding. It's a guide and it's a tool to be used.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions or comments about any of these three areas that we were going to bring to town meeting or the roadmap? Well, hopefully this has been educational as well as achieving the public hearing. So Chris, Michael's still there. I want to thank you both for joining us because we could not do this without you, both tonight and just throughout the whole process. It seems like, I don't know, it might have been a year already that we've been discussing this. So we've already got technical assistance and we appreciate this. It's too formal to say you guys are the state. It's sort of regional partners who are here helping our community.
Right.
And I want to thank ECAC members for doing it, and I want to thank Rita and Melissa for showing up from the select board. It's really appreciated. And I think with that, we could probably adjourn the meeting and everyone could go do something for the rest of the night with their feet up. So Rita, you want to say something?
No, just say good
You
night
just
and thank
waving?
you to our partners from the state. We appreciate your time tonight.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well,
Yes.
thank you all, and have a good rest of the evening. And ECAC folks will communicate when we're meeting next via email. So
Great.
see you
Good
guys
night,
later.
everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.